I had just lost my husband, Zachary. My in-laws felt sorry for me, especially since I was pregnant. They suggested that Zachary's twin brother, Ethan, should taking care of both families without explicitly marriage to both women. Ethan's wife, Sophia, called me shameless and fainted from anger. That night, I went to my in-laws' door. I wanted to persuade them to give up this idea, but I accidentally overheard my mother-in-law asking in confusion, "It was clearly your brother who died. Why did you insist it was you?" The man sighed and said, "Sophia is fragile. If she knew my brother had passed away, she definitely couldn't bear it. Besides, the one I've always loved is her. I only married Rachel to let her be with my brother. Now, I've already given Rachel a child. I don't owe her anything anymore. In the future, I'll take care of Sophia for the rest of my life in place of my brother. Don't mention taking care of both families again. It'll only upset Sophia." I finally understood. The person who died wasn't my husband, but his brother Ethan. The next day, I said to my in-laws at the dinner table, "You've been urging me to move on. I've thought it through now and decided to terminate this pregnancy and start a new life." The man who was taking care of his sister-in-law's meal suddenly stood up. "After my husband's funeral, I found out I was pregnant for this child. I tried hard to suppress my pain deep in my heart, afraid that my emotions would affect the baby, but because my husband Zachary had weak sperm, this pregnancy was particularly difficult. Not only did I need daily injections to keep the baby, but I also vomited until I nearly fainted. In just over a month of pregnancy, I had already lost over 40 pounds. I was almost half dead." Later, my in-laws couldn't bear to see me like this anymore. They tried to persuade me to terminate the pregnancy, to forget Zachary and start a new life, but I refused all their suggestions. Zachary was so good to me. How could I give up? Actually, when I first got engaged, it wasn't to Zachary, but to his brother Ethan. But before the wedding, I was kidnapped and abused for 3 days and nights. Ethan thought I was impure and broke off the engagement to marry Sophia instead. It was Zachary who rescued me from the kidnappers. He was stabbed multiple times but still held me tightly. He knelt firmly in front of my father, saying he had loved me for a long time and wanted to marry me. For years, everyone said he loved me deeply, and under his gentle care, I gradually healed the wounds in my heart. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. Just 3 years after our marriage, he died in a car accident. My world collapsed, and I even thought about following him. It was this child that gave me the motivation to live on. This was his only bloodline. Even if it cost me my life, I wanted to keep this child. Seeing my insistence, my in-laws stopped trying to persuade me, but the very next day, during lunch, they suggested that Zachary's twin brother Ethan should take care of both families, to look after me and the child in my womb. I was about to refuse, but sister-in-law Sophia suddenly had an emotional breakdown. She slapped me across the face, crying and cursing me for being shameless. She was already weak, and before I had time to explain, she fainted from the shock. Ethan frowned, looking at me with displeasure. Then he left, holding Sophia lovingly in his arms. Sophia's slap caused me to have pregnancy complications again. I had to stay in bed for 2 days before I barely recovered. I didn't blame Sophia. After all, I had been engaged to Ethan before, so it was understandable that she had some resentment. Moreover, not to mention that Zachary and I had a good relationship. Even if we didn't, the idea of Ethan taking care of both families was absurd. Not only for them as a couple, but I wouldn't agree to it either. I felt a bit guilty for making my sister-in-law faint. So, when I was able to get out of bed, I went to my in-laws' room. I wanted to persuade them to give up this idea and never mention it again. I also thought that after convincing my in-laws, I would personally go to apologize to Ethan and Sophia to put their minds at ease. However, just as I reached the door of my in-laws' room, I heard my mother-in-law's confused voice from inside. "Zachary, it was clearly your brother who died. Why did you insist it was you?" "Zachary, wasn't that my husband's name? He didn't die." The person who died in the car accident was actually my husband's older brother Ethan. I was shocked, as if struck by lightning. My eyes widened, and I stood there stunned. How could this be possible? I shook my head hard, thinking I must be hallucinating. But the next second, I heard a man's voice from inside. "Mom, don't let Sophia know about this. She's always been weak and sickly, with a bad heart. If she knew it was my brother who passed away, her body definitely couldn't take it." "Ethan, no, I should call him Zachary. My husband Zachary." He paused, then sighed, and said, "Besides, the person I've always loved is Sophia. I only married Rachel to let Sophia be with my brother. Now, I've given Rachel a child, so I don't owe her anything anymore. In the future, I'll take care of Sophia for the rest of my life in place of my brother. Don't mention taking care of both families again. It'll only make Sophia sad and upset. But Rachel has already suffered enough. Back then, to break off her engagement with your brother and let your brother be with Sophia, you deliberately had someone kidnap Rachel for 3 days and nights, causing her to be abused. Now that she's finally moved on and is carrying your child, it's only right for you to take care of her." My mother-in-law wanted to continue persuading him, but Zachary impatiently interrupted her. "Enough, Mom. To make up for her, I married her without caring about others mocking me for accepting a tainted woman. Then I took care of her wholeheartedly for 3 years, helping her move on. Isn't that enough? Do you want me to spend my whole life repaying her? Mom, I've suffered for 3 years, pretended for 3 years. I've had enough. Living with her is torture for me every day. Now that heaven has given me a chance to be with Sophia again, I don't want to give up this opportunity." They said some more things inside, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. I just felt cold all over. It felt like someone had stabbed me hard in the chest. The pain was unbearable. I stumbled back to my room. Only then did I realize that my whole body was shaking, and my face was already covered in tears. So, the person who died in the car accident wasn't my husband at all, but his brother Ethan. And Zachary's deep love and gentle care for me over these 3 years were all fake. The person he liked, from beginning to end, was the same as his brother. Only Sophia. Even the person who had me kidnapped back then was Zachary. The reason was simply to let Sophia marry Ethan. If they didn't want to marry me, they could have broken off the engagement openly, but they chose to ruin me instead. What's more ridiculous is that I actually treated this demon as my salvation, and I was even willing to risk my life to have his child. Although I had tried hard to calm my emotions, the hatred and anger in my heart still made my tears flow flow uncontrollably. The next day, I came downstairs with swollen red eyes and a pale face. I saw Zachary carefully taking care of Sophia's meal. The two of them were cuddling together, looking very intimate. From a distance, they really looked like a perfect couple. I clenched my fists. The pain in my palms made my mind clearer. Soon, Sophia noticed that I had come down. Seeing my miserable appearance, her eyes showed a hint of triumph. Then, as if to show off, she buried her head in Zachary's arms and acted coquettishly. As for Zachary, his heart was completely focused on Sophia. He was dedicated to taking care of her meal and hadn't noticed my arrival. I lowered my eyes, looking at his doting smile towards Sophia. My heart was filled with mockery. This kind of doting was something I had never seen in these 3 years. I touched my belly and calmly sat down in the dining chair. Then I lowered my head and started eating. I picked the nutritious food to eat, forcing myself to eat more. I would terminate this pregnancy and take care of my own body, then make those who had hurt me pay the price double. After eating my fill, I wiped my mouth. Opposite me, Zachary had also finished attending to Sophia's meal. He finally had time to look up at me. When he saw my swollen eyes and pale face, he was slightly stunned. He probably thought I had been crying again because of his death, and there was a moment of guilt on his face. But he quickly cooled his expression and said displeased, "Sister-in-law, I know you're sad about Zachary's death, but I won't agree to take care of both families. My heart only has room for your sister-in-law Sophia. It's impossible for me to give even a bit of my heart to you." Sophia's eyes looked at me even more triumphantly, but on the surface, she pretended to be worried and said, "Sister-in-law, you didn't cry all night because my husband refused to take care of both families, did you?" "I'm sorry, I was too impulsive yesterday, but I really can't give up the husband I love deeply." As she spoke, her frail body trembled and her eyes reddened again. She covered her chest, looking extremely distressed. Zachary was heartbroken. He glared at me warningly. Then he hugged Sophia in his arms comfortingly. "Sophia, don't worry, I only have you in this life. I would rather die than touch another woman." How ironic. Then where did the child in my womb come from? But then again, he did indeed die. I suppressed the bitterness and anger in my heart, no longer looking at this loving couple. I forced down my nausea and nodded. "Don't worry, the idea of taking care of both families is absurd. I wouldn't agree to it either." After hearing my words, Zachary turned his head and looked at me with some surprise. I looked up and saw my in-laws coming down from upstairs. They had also heard what I just said. They looked at my pale face and swollen eyes with pity. My mother-in-law hesitated. "Rachel." I looked at my in-laws, feeling mixed emotions. Since I married into the family, they had indeed treated me well. Their concern these days was also genuine. But when I thought about how Zachary had me kidnapped and abused for 3 days and nights, and they all knew about it, only keeping it from me alone, my feelings towards them became indescribably complex. I could no longer call them mom and dad. "You heard me. The idea of taking care of both families is too absurd. I don't agree." My mother-in-law probably remembered what Zachary had said yesterday and didn't try to persuade me further. She just sighed and said, "I know you have deep feelings for Zachary and can't forget him, so you definitely wouldn't agree to this. But Mom is really worried about you." She paused, looked at Zachary, and continued earnestly, "Rachel, Zachary is gone, but you're still alive. People need to look forward. Mom still wants to advise you not to always think about him. Move on early and start a new life." Zachary and Sophia, who were sitting opposite, heard that I didn't agree to the idea of taking care of both families. They obviously relaxed, and their expressions improved. As for Zachary, his eyes looking at me became more complex. Hearing his mother's words, he also started to pretend to persuade me. "Sister-in-law, Mom is right. Zachary is gone. No matter how much you love him, you're now separated by life and death. There's no possibility between you anymore. You still have to live your life in the future. It's better to forget him early. It's good for both you and him. Fortunately, he left you a child, which is something to remember him by. In the future, without him, you can still live on with his child. For the sake of the child in your womb, you should be strong and move on early." Listening to Zachary's high-sounding words, I couldn't help but laugh coldly in my heart. The child? He still dreams that I would give birth to his child? What a delusion. I was filled with mockery in my heart, but on the surface, I pretended to be moved and went along with their words. "You're right. I thought about it all night last night, and I've understood. Before, I was indeed stuck in a rut, making you all worry. Moreover, since Zachary was born with weak sperm, and this pregnancy is so difficult, it must be heaven's will, destining him to have no descendants in this life. So, I want to follow heaven's will and listen to your advice. Terminate this pregnancy, let him go completely, remarry, and start a new life."